Today on Questions, is the Bible racist? Hey everybody, welcome to Questions. This is episode 3. If you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, what this is basically we are answering any and every question that you might have based on faith, religion, spirituality, or meaning in general. We are a community of people that you can find out more about on Fellowship Cooperative on Instagram. Otherwise, this is also being put on YouTube under just my personal channel, Brennan Johnson. And you can always be asking questions, anyone and everyone. We accept and take all questions, and we will answer it to the best of our abilities. So, today is question 3, episode 3. We're 3 in, baby. Woohoo! Let's do it. Today's question is, why follow the Bible when racism, sexism, homophobia, and genocide are promoted? Ooh, huge question. And this is actually, might sound weird to say, but this is something I love talking about. Because the first question you have to ask yourself really is the Bible racist, sexist, homophobic, and genocidal? And the answer you kind of have to reach is, yep. Of course it is. But only because humans are racist, sexist, homophobic, and genocidal. In the broad spectrum of beliefs in the Bible, you have one side of the spectrum where people believe the Bible, that Scripture is literally just stories, moral tales written by tribes of ancient people that they believe to be true. And here we are 2,000 years later, and some people still believe it's true, but really what it is just moralistic tales told by ancient peoples. There's no truth, there's no fact, it's just stories written by people. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who believe that Scripture is God-breathed. Another way of saying that is God-inspired. That the Spirit of God was on the people who wrote down their experiences or the experiences of others that they had with God, the divine, the spiritual world, something bigger, larger than themselves. And so those are the two far ends of the spectrum, and there's a wide spectrum of how people think about what people believe specifically about the Judeo-Christian Scripture, that it's God-breathed or it's just moralistic tales written by ancient people. And so people, we can the two sides in the whole spectrum can bicker and fight and can talk about big fish in the ocean or 12 graves of Jewish men found in Egypt, and what have you. But I think all people across the entire spectrum of beliefs on Scripture would say that the Bible was written by people, for people, about people. I mean, all sins can be found in the Bible because that's how we know they're sins. Just as the same, all virtues can be found in the Bible. That's why we know they are virtues. If we want to question racism and sexism and homophobia and genocide in the Bible, and we want to wonder if the Bible still is relevant because of these factors inside of the Bible, we have to ask then, is that outdated when in 2021 we still have faults as humanity? I mean, is racism, sexism, homophobia, genocide, is that outdated barbaric systems? Yes. Can we move past those ideas? No, because they still exist today, and we still have to talk about them, and we still have to address them. Have we solved racism in 2021, or are black people still being shot down by cops at a larger percentile than white people? Is there still institutional and systematic racism in the world? Is sexism a thing of the past, or are women still attacked and abused at higher rates than men? Do women still, on average, make about 70-something cents on the dollar what they would make at a job if they were men? Does homophobia still exist today? Are LGBTQIA plus individuals still being murdered at the highest rates of any group of people in the country? Does genocide still something we deal with? We're going to talk about the genocide in China or past generations like Rwanda. The fact that we live on what used to be called Turtle Island with people who were indigenous to this land. Like, these are issues that still affect us today. And so we can't blame the Bible for being barbaric or ruthless or wrong or primitive without saying that humanity right now is barbaric, primitive, horrific, and evil. It's just the truth. The Bible has these things inside of it because the Bible is written for people, by people, about people. But, so the question I think is really important to ask then is, does the narrative arc, is the message of Scripture pointing towards something better or something worse? Because the argument could be made that God calls for beliefs and practices that are racist, sexist, homophobic, genocidal. And if you want to look in Scripture, you can find God telling people to do things that we today can label as racist, sexist, homophobic, genocidal. But I believe personally that you have to look at the narrative arc of Scripture, the direction the story is moving. If you look at the very beginning of civilization, people were ruthless, people were violent, people were horrific to each other. If you wronged someone, or if a tribe wronged your tribe, if a group wronged your group, there was no institution to put laws in place, there were no safety nets. It was escalating wrongness. They wronged you, so you wronged them, so they wronged you back, and it got worse and worse and worse. It wasn't an eye for an eye. It was an eye for a insult, and then that, because of that taking of an eye, you then slit their throat, and then you kill their family. Then you do. It always escalated. So when God speaks in the Bible, God sees humanity where they're at, of just endless escalation, and says, no, this is not how this is going to work anymore. We are now going to do an eye for an eye. Justifiable end. You took their eye, they take your eye, it's done. And that was a huge step forward for civilization. And so while we can still say that's barbaric, that's horrific, that's primitive to have that sort of justice system, it was moving in the right direction. I truly believe that if God spoke to people in the past and said what God says in the New Testament to these people living thousands upon thousands of years before the New Testament was written, they probably wouldn't have survived. Teaching about peace and not fighting and not going to war meant that those people would probably be slaughtered in a matter of years. Warfare was just a part of life. If you didn't go to war, you didn't exist. And that's, again, barbaric, primitive, horrific. That was life back then. So instead of just saying, yeah, just be that, be terrible, God moves them one step forward. And if you continue to read through Scripture, you see steps and steps. That when God enters into the world to speak to people, the thing God says challenges them to be one step better than what society is doing. So we can see that God says something that could be taken as racist. God says something that could be taken as sexist. God says things that could be taken as homophobic. God says things that might promote genocide. But let's talk about genocide. So there are points in the Bible where God says, go to battle with these people, do not allow a single one to exist. Horrific, terrible by our standards. Yet, take a few books later, take a few stories later, take what happens later on, and God calls those very people to have a seat at the table with the rest of people. So the point of the things God says is not endless. When God says the Moabites are evil, that's not throughout all time. When God says the Canaanites are evil, it's not throughout all time, because later God calls the Moabites, God calls the Canaanites to sit at the table. So there is just this continual challenge to the people who are trying to follow after God. Not just to stay where they are, not just to do the things that they have always done, but to always be challenging, to always be moving. So then when we get to Jesus, what does Jesus say? But love your enemies. So it's no longer eye for an eye, but it's actually just turn the other cheek. Love your enemy, love the person who, pray for those who persecute you. It's a huge more challenge. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Jesus is literally changing everything, challenging people to such an extent that warfare, prejudice, hate are no longer tolerated. And it gets to the point where the disciples of Jesus later go on to say, they will know that you are a follower of Christ by your love. They will know that you are following God by your love. They will know that you are a follower of the Christ through your love. So other parts of the scripture say that God is love, which means then that in love, racism can't exist. And there's a precedent for that. When Paul says there's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, man nor woman, he's saying that the things that we use to divide ourselves no longer exist. We cannot divide ourselves. We cannot have hierarchies. There's no more better or worse. There are just people, and we have to treat all people as creations of the divine. So then, when we look into the world today, and when we looked into the world the last 2,000 years, the call, the challenge should be, is this love? Well, hate does not fit into love, which means racism cannot fit into love. Sexism cannot fit into love. Homophobia cannot fit into love. Genocide cannot fit into love. Can you take the things that Paul said? Can you take the things that God said? Can you take the things that the heroes of Scripture wrote as condoning racism, sexism, homophobia, genocide? Yes, people have used Scripture to do terrible, terrible things because taken out of context, you can basically justify almost any wrongdoing. But you have to look at the narrative arc, and the narrative arc is always opening further and further, wanting more people to come in, wanting more people to have a seat at the table, wanting more people to be able to bask in the light and the love and the forgiveness and the grace and the mercy of Jesus. So when we see hate in any form, we know whether the person claims to be a follower of the way, claims to be a follower of God, claims to be a Christian, claims to be a good person, no matter who they are, who they claim to be, if we see hate, it's not from God. And we can tell it's not from God because the Scripture that we have been given, however you want to look at or believe, that's a question for another day. But because Scripture points us to a God who is continuing to open the door, invite more and more in to have a seat at the table. It's not closing it, it's not narrowing it, it's not excluding more and more, it's opening to more and more people. So when we see hate, we can know in the depths of our being that that person, that action, those words are not from God or do not please God, and that they are not sanctioned by any form of Scripture. I could talk a lot more about this, but I have a very set time limit if this is going to fit onto the Instagrams. So I'm going to leave it there. If you want to follow up, if you have more questions, any questions at all, keep sending them our way. We can do part 2s. We can go more in depth in later videos, but that's what I got for today. Let me know your thoughts. Keep asking questions. Grace and peace. See you next time. Cheers.